Thank you for joining for this episode of the TechSpective podcast. I have Anthony with me. So Anthony, if you want to introduce yourself, give a little bit of background on yourself, your company, etc., and then we'll take it from there.
Sounds like a plan. I'm Anthony Cusimano. I'm the Director of Technical Marketing at Object First. It's a relatively new company. We just launched last year in 2023, February 14th, Valentine's Day. Our product Utbi stands for out-of-the-box immutability, and we share the same two founders as Veeam, Ratmir Timoshev and Andrei Baranov. So it's an exciting place to be, and I'm excited to be here today.
Okay. Well, so I guess let's start with a little bit more background on Object First. So what does Object First do? What's your primary focus?
So I give a little bit of a tease in the intro because I think if you know who Ratmir and Andrei are, you know right. Veeam, then you know that they've got a mind when it comes to data protection, data recovery. So I think I don't come from the Veeam world. I came from a Veeam competitor when I joined here, but it's funny because I talk to all these Veeam folks and they tell me the same thing, that Ratmir and Andrei said they'll never build a hardware company in their life. You know, they built the top backup storage vendor on the planet, but they said they'd never get into hardware. And I think about 4 or 5 years ago, they started to see this trend in the industry where a lot of backup vendors didn't have a good grasp on the storage targets they were using for their backup destinations. They were either building it themselves, doing some DIY, DAS, NAS combo, just dumping data in there, or they were buying hardware from vendors that, you know, they just kind of rack stack, forget about it. And when ransomware started attacking backups really heavily, I think it was around like 2017, when we saw the big shift going from just attacking production data to attacking backup data. They said, we got to get in on this. We have to fix this problem. So they started Object First. They prototyped out this box, which we call Utbi. It stands for out-of-the-box immutability. It's an on-prem hardware appliance built explicitly for Veeam. So it only works with Veeam, and its only purpose is to be a 15-minute to configure landing zone for your Veeam backup data. And you set your immutability window. And when that data lands on our box, there is no way you can get it off for the duration of that window. One of the unique things about it is the decision to make it so simple that it locks you out of a lot of features and functionality you'd expect in traditional storage appliances. Administrative privilege, you have none of that. We give zero access to the root or backend. So if you overload the box with your immutable data, you've got to wait for that data to expire, because they saw this need to create something that when Veeam sends over encrypted data, we know the ransomware is going to attack the box. They're going to try and get in. So if you eliminate any way for that to happen beyond just writing via S3 key, there's no way to get it off. And now you have something that is effectively ransomware-proof. There's still obviously the risks of physical access and natural disasters, but they wanted to build something that really solved for that ransomware problem that goes beyond just backing up data. And I think they've done a good job with it. You know, we just celebrated our first birthday last year. It's been a real fun year from like a startup perspective of getting a product out to market and seeing how it fits. But we're having a great time doing it. And I think our first year customers are seeing the results.
Okay. Well, one of the things is so just on that angle, that aspect of it, I've worked with companies that are, very heavily focused on, the ransomware problem. And so I watched ransomware go from, just a different kind of virus, basically. It had a different payload. The payload wasn't going to encrypt your computer. To, like you said, kind of expanding and saying, oh, well, if people are going to start restoring from backup instead of paying us a ransom, why don't we figure out all of the network connected backups and encrypt those too? And then moving on to the double extortion model of, well, we're going to steal your data first, and that way we can, you have an added incentive to pay this ransom. But I think there's a little bit of a shift back the other way towards, so there was a period there where not the company stopped backing up their data, but there was a period there where backing up your data was no longer a solution to the ransomware equation because you have this double extortion thing hanging over you. But I feel like it's shifted back some because now we have all this data that says companies that pay the ransom often get hit again within a month by the same attackers, and companies that pay the ransom typically only get back like 50 to 60% of their data because the decryption key sucks. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's in defense of the ransomware developers. That's not their primary goal. Their primary goal is to encrypt your data. So the encryption key works great. The decryption key, they don't care so much about. You know, they're like, all right, here you go, work it out.
Right.
But if you're the company now and you say, okay, well, you know, initially you know there was ransomware, you saw it starting to escalate, so you said, oh, well, we better back up our data. Then they said, okay, well, we're going to steal your data. And you go, okay, well, I don't need to focus on that so much anymore. But now it's back to, well, no, you better back up your data, because even if you pay the ransom and get the decryption key, there's a good chance you're going to need to restore from backup.
Yep. And it's interesting. In the last year, I would say even in the last 6 months, there's been a unique shift that came from Veeam and Numberline, who they put together this research paper called Zero Trust Data Resilience. And the idea behind that is exactly what you're saying. It's, you know, zero trust has made such a wave when it comes to securing production apps and infrastructure. Assume breach, try to verify access every step of the way, have policy detection points and policy encryption points. If you create steps and you segment everything, you can lock down or lock out the attacker from getting access to lots of different things. Instead, you're trying to minimize the spread, create the smallest attack surface possible. But Veeam and Numberline saw that there was no zero trust for backup specifically. We kind of just failed on, not we, but like the CISAs and all those, the NISTs, they just didn't think about backup as part of the zero trust equation. So they recently wrote this article called Zero Trust Data Resilience. And part of the key principles are you need to take zero trust and apply it to backup and recovery and backup storage specifically, because it's exactly what you said. If you do zero trust in your production data center, that's great. Now you can at least stop the double extortions, right? Like they might get some of your data, but it's not all of it. And if you have backups, you'll be able to get it back. And the shift started happening back to attacking the backups again, just for that reason. It's like, well, we can restore our data. If they're only hitting little parts of it, restoration is only going to take 24 hours. So you can get back up and running, no problem. They continue to attack the backups again because it's always been a weak point in the armor of security and GSO is backups managed by IT. No offense to any backup or admins out there, but they aren't trained in security the way that a GSO or a DevSecOps is. And it's not expected of them. So it's still been the weak link. And the thing I love about this paper is it's a great primer for anyone to take these small steps to kind of implement and incorporate zero trust into your backup strategy, create that segmentation, utilize devices like our object first OOTB, and have that locked down sort of landing zone where once data gets in here, it's not going anywhere. There's no amount of, decryption or attack that will be able to get to that storage target. And that helps a lot. But I think the thing we have to be cognizant of is it's never going to stop. And proactivity is definitely the key. Like, we make backup storage and backup better, and they'll just start attacking production again. And they'll it's always going to be a back and forth tug of war.
Right. Well, it just on the backup element as well, so like, once upon a time I was a network admin, we did, we had, we had rotating storage. So I had a robotic, tape backup thing that would like automatically swap out the tapes for me. And we would keep, weekly backups on site. We'd take like quarterly backups and store them off site, so we had all this like redundancy of backups. But at the time, and I'm sure this still happens now, although I hope that people have gotten better at this than we were doing it, back when I was in the trenches. What would inevitably happen is we would dedicate all this time to coming up with a backup policy and a backup system, and we were backing up, and we were very good at that part. What we weren't good at is actually verifying that we backed up what we thought we backed up.
Yeah.
And then when the shit hit the fan, and we go to get the backup, we're like, oh, actually, we don't have the data we thought we had, or the backup's corrupt, or whatever. And so it's like I guess for those who maybe aren't doing it, I definitely stress somehow verifying your backups periodically to make sure you have what you think you have.
It's everyone knows 3-2-1. That became the big adage in the last 5 years against ransomware, 3 copies of your data, 2 media types, 1 offsite. And I love that we went and we just had to amend that by 3211, one of which is offsite or air gapped or immutable. And then they added the 0 after that. So 32110, 0 errors, because verification is huge. And no one was verifying their backups. Like, I'm sure eventually 32110 will just become an entire phone number worth of things that we have to recite and get through. I think we're at a zip code right now. But it's interesting because it's so hard to stay abreast of everything technologically today. Like, there's so much change and churn. We're constantly having to deal with completely disruptive technologies like AI and the data generation that comes with that. And, our society can't keep up with how fast we're advancing. And that's doubly true for anyone working in IT, is the amount you have to know today to be successful at your job, like backing up all of the different resources in your infrastructure. If you have Microsoft 365, you probably need a completely different utility than what you're paying for today to back up that data. And that's a huge chunk of data for every company. So my heart does go out for those folks. I'm lucky. I just have to talk about it and I have to view it and think about it. But it's not a job I'd wish on anyone. And I think at least the positives I can see in this is companies like ourselves, companies like Veeam, they're trying to simplify this process. They're constantly trying to educate and create ways that make capturing all of this data, which there is far too much of, easier. But it's a total just impossible or an unmovable object hitting an unstoppable force type problem where you're never going to be able to outpace the amount of change and churn that actually happens. So you try to get the best or the most of the best stuff you can get and hope that's enough when it comes time to recover.
Yeah. Well, so here's another thing that's slightly dated, but not quite as dated. As the cloud, was becoming mainstream, and and especially from a consumer perspective, and you have these cloud backup services, and I'm not gonna name names to throw the exact specific company under the bus, but my wife was a professional photographer, and she was trying to back up. She wanted to make sure she had backups of all of the photo shoots, and so it's a storage intensive thing to have all these raw images, and so we had subscribed to this service, and we said, okay, cool, we pay the money, we turn it on, it's backing up. And I had done the math. I'm like, I've got I didn't have gigabit at the time, but I mean I had like a 500 megabit connection or whatever. And I was doing the math in my head going, okay, well, there's this much data, we have this much of a bandwidth, this is our bandwidth, this is what should happen. So we checked back like a month later, they'd backed up like 15%. And when I reached out to customer service, be like, what the hell's going on here? And they're like, well, our end is slower at processing stuff. And I'm like, okay, but at the rate that you're doing this, my data will never actually be backed up because I'm continuing to add data. You haven't caught up with the data that I started with. And so we ended up dropping that service. And it's, so all that's a long anecdote to, that sometimes on-prem might be the better way to go, or at least if you're going to do a cloud backup, make sure you have that conversation or do that research to make sure that the bandwidth and the processing capacity of the server on the other end can keep up.
It's a story I've heard far too often. And, people ask me, they're like, well, Anthony, who's your big competitors? Do you compete with cloud? It's like, no, we don't really compete with anybody today. Like, we're just trying to create as many points of recovery as we can. And to your point, Tony, having the on-prem option is always going to be a factor of convenience and speed, just because it's closer, right? You're not dealing with speed of light and all of the things that come with sending data to a secondary location. And people will then come back and say, well, I don't have the space, I don't have the budget, but there's hidden costs in all of these things too. And for me personally, I look at it as you want to, 321 was actually invented by a photographer. Interestingly enough, I'm sure you know this, but they saw a need to have 3 copies of every photo, the original, and then 2 backups. One which that's not in their house, it was stored, I think, at like a bank or something. We've come up with these tools and mechanisms and principles to keep our data safe, but unfortunately, I don't know if businesses and their budgets see this as necessary. And then they run into problems with their various vendors because they're not using them for the appropriate things. Like the thing I love about cloud is it's great for archival. Long-term retention, sending the data you have to keep for 7+ years for GDPR or just legal reasons. Cloud is perfect for that use case. But when you're in a recovery pinch, one, you don't want to test that data because if you have to test it, bring it back, mess with it, you're going to incur all kinds of fees. But two, it's not a convenient destination to send things to for primary. That's part of the reason why, Ratmir and Andre decided to build UPI was the convenience of on-prem is just unbeatable when it comes to the backup and recovery use case, especially for that fresh, we've just been hit, we got to get these files back right now type cases. So it's one of those conversations that I think we have to continue to do the math and think about, like, what is convenient for us? How do we make this the most effective that we can be without sacrificing anything along the way?
Okay. Well, you had mentioned, and I remember the exact context, but you mentioned the elephant in the room for the last year and a half, which is AI, generative AI. How does that, what role does that play in this equation?
I shudder to think about AI. It's the thing that keeps me up at night and then makes me nervous during the day. And it's not because it's bad. It's because it's good. And it's so good that I think it's just creating a whole new way that we have to think about data and what is useful. I know in some of the pre-conversations before we set up this chat, I mentioned some of the folks on my team about the dead internet theory, which is, it's a little bit of a conspiracy theory, but I like the truth behind it, which, if you go on Twitter, you go on YouTube, you go anywhere, the number one comment on every post is going to be a bot. And that's not objectively always true, but it is true more often than it's not, right? Like we see bots creating conversations, responding to each other. I absolutely hate when I see an interesting YouTube video and I click on it and it's some AI reading me the synopsis of a comic book that I'm interested in. It's like, this is the most low effort, no effort garbage that could potentially exist. And, we see this on the internet. And then there are businesses that have to deal with this data, right? Like this is just, it is data that is comprised of other data, but effectively it is garbage data. And, the dead internet theory supposes that, in a few years' time, there's going to just be only bots communicating amongst themselves and creating content on the internet. And it's one of those challenges where I think AI is such a great tool for ideation, for creativity, for being able to elevate the skills you have. But I think we see it be used as more of a cheat sheet or like a cheat code to quickly get things out and just create lots and lots of content. And the businesses that are responsible for this content and this data, I think are ultimately the ones that suffer the most because they have to come up with the principle. Do we back this up? Like, how do we treat this versus actual good data, be it art, be it, customer client data? There's going to be so much generated content now that, I don't have the answer. This is why it keeps me up. It's like, I don't know how we solve for this. Our product today comes in 128 terabyte nodes. But, if a business is dealing with AI and they're having to now back up all this generated data, that number can quickly spiral out of control to a number that we can't effectively back up. Even with, all the hardware in the world, like you hit the diminishing returns with the combination of, cloud storage and all that. It's scary to think about. And for me, I think the big question is, how do we differentiate what is data that needs to be backed up versus what is garbage? And we don't have a way to really figure that out yet.
Well, I won't hold my breath because it's the same question we were asking. It's the question we've always asked. I mean, so like around 2010, I was working with a company that was, focused on, DLP. So we were, focused on data loss protection. And the thing is, the big issue at the time, and it has improved since then, but it's still an issue, was that classification. It's like, okay, well, I don't need to block everything. It's like, I don't care about a lot of this stuff, but then you need to have some kind of a system that says, okay, well, this is sensitive data, this is top secret data, this is confidential data. Like something has to flag the data. And most of the products at the time put the responsibility on the data creator, or at least on some sort of, IT, head of data. And it's like, okay, so now my job is to go through like every single file and say, okay, fine. Okay, that's sensitive. Okay. And so now you're down to human error and a volume of data that no human can actually keep up with in the first place. So so you need an automated solution, but the automation isn't significantly better in a lot of cases at determining, okay, well, what's sensitive, what's not. I mean, you have certain masks you can do where you could say, okay, that's a credit card number, that's a social security number, that's a birth date, and so you can automate some of that. But when it comes to things that are like, secret sauce, intellectual property files, things like that, it may not be that obvious, and so it becomes harder to automate. At the same time, I'm going to flip it and say that one of the other challenges on the AI side with data, kind of going back to the dead internet theory, but kind of before we get to that level of it, is just I said this last year, and I'm continuing to beat this drum, that if you have your own data set, you have your own generative AI model, and you're training it on your own data set internally or whatever, fine. At least then you can say, okay, I'm a company that focuses on architecture, and I can have all the information I possibly need for answering architecture questions in my data set, and then I'm going to get better answers. But when you look at something like ChatGPT, which is the kind of the default one that's out there, or those types of models that are trained on the internet at large, and that mainstream everyday people are using like extensively.
Yep.
So someone goes out, they say, hey, ChatGPT, how do I make pasta from scratch? And ChatGPT goes and finds an answer, gives it to you. The thing is, there's a cognitive bias of assuming the computer knows more than you. So most people aren't going to double check that. Most people are going to take whatever ChatGPT says and say, well, that must be factual. And so now let's say that they just go republish that. And so it becomes like a self-feeding spiral down of ChatGPT is using the internet to train to get its information, and then you are taking that information and republishing it to the internet, which now pollutes the data set further, so that 5 months from now, when someone asks the same question, they get an even worse answer.
It's funny. My friend was just telling me a few days ago. He also writes a lot of content for a marketing company. He's like, I use ChatGPT a lot. I just don't feel like it's very good anymore. Like, well, what do you expect? All we've done is publish ChatGPT articles for the last year and a half. It's feeding off of itself. We're going to completely ruin the data set by just continuously publishing and republishing and not validating and not verifying and doing quality checks on this generated work. It is interesting to me how quickly as humans we can spot AI. We took decades to build this technology and get it to where it is, and it took us less than a year of COVID to lockdown to be like, yeah, that was written by an AI. I can just tell. It's funny.
Well, and even now, like so on the one hand, I would say ChatGPT is reasonably good at creating content, but it's not a finished product. So like,
yep.
You can't just take the answer and publish it online and go, okay, this is my thing. And the thing is, I can spot those. I can go look on, someone writes a LinkedIn post where they think they're being profound, making some big statement, and then you look at it and you're like, oh, that's totally a ChatGPT, generated content. I can see it in blog posts. And on the one hand, I don't hold it against some companies. Like if you have had to make budget cuts and you had to let people go or whatever from marketing, like it can be a tool that can help you get there. It can be a force multiplier that helps you get more done. But I think it's like you got to do the little bit extra though, because like I saw someone talk the other day about how one of the problems that we're going to have from a content perspective, from whether it's news, sports news, whatever, just from a content perspective, if everyone is using ChatGPT, all of the data sounds the same. Yep. We're going to get all the same stuff. And so now you lose, well, we both kind of have the same name, but you lose Tony's perspective versus Anthony's perspective. And the things that make it, like the things that make someone want to read my content, ostensibly, like yes, the actual content itself and the facts that I'm sharing, the information that I'm sharing, those things are not unique to me. Anyone else can write about the same things, but the way I say them and like the nuance that I bring to it is unique to me, or should be unique to me, and there should be like some differentiation there. and again, if everyone is resorting to ChatGPT, then you lose some of that. I mean, like, I don't know that they're using ChatGPT, but I mean, Sports Illustrated just recently like let go like everybody, so like Sports Illustrated is like just AI generated content at this point, as far as I know.
It's wild, and it's funny to me because I remember when I was in college and I was writing papers, my professors always say like find real sources, right? Like don't go to Wikipedia, don't go there. That's cheating, and that's not, Wikipedia is not a real source. And I feel like the evolution of that has truly become just, well, now professional outlets, just like you said, are essentially just letting robots write their content without any thought behind it. It's like, at least in the days of Wikipedia, that was a human being, it was community sourced human thought. And sure, there were entries that were wrong, but I feel like 99.9% of the time, that's totally made up statistic. You are getting accurate information on Wikipedia because humans care.
Right.
A robot doesn't know any better.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think that I think that like shunning Wikipedia is sort of silly, because it is a crowdsourced thing where the whole world has input. So like, yes, there would be, factually incorrect things, but they never lasted long, because
that's how you get the truth.
The community would come along and correct it. I think it's okay as a source, but the other thing that I've watched this evolution since the public unveiling of ChatGPT, and to me, it's very similar to the advent of Google or the advent of Netscape, where Google fundamentally changed the way we search the internet. And at the time, like the example you just gave, everyone would say, oh, well, you can't use Google to research your paper. That's cheating. You gotta go to the library, go through the card catalog, find it the old-fashioned way. And the thing is, that's a very short-sighted point of view. It's like, okay, I get that's not the way you've done it in the past, but now we have a tool that does it faster, better, easier. Why wouldn't I use that tool? And we've seen that over the it took a while, but over time, everyone came to accept that. And then it became it went from don't use Google to, well, you'd better use Google, otherwise you're not gonna get there. I'm seeing the same thing now with generative AI, where like, yeah, absolutely, there are companies and there are schools that are saying, don't use it, we'll expel you. But I also know people, and I had Sam Curry, who's a friend of mine and CSO at Zscaler, was on the podcast last month or whatever, and we talked about how he also teaches at a college, and he has not banned it. He was like, listen, until or unless the school overrides me, I am okay with you using generative AI. But you have to provide me your prompts. I want to know, what did you ask?
I like that.
And the thing is, I think that makes sense, because it's not, it makes sense to use it. It's a useful tool. It's just, you have to recognize that it's a tool. So by all means, you can't go ask ChatGPT the answers to your essay questions and then just copy and paste the answer from ChatGPT into your thing and go, there you go, that's the answer. But you should be able to use it as the tool that it is.
I like that a lot. And I think that's the compromise we're gonna have to get to with a lot of the AI. It's not just ChatGPT, it's everything. The thing that is interesting is all of this leads to more creativity and potentially more content and business for businesses that is a positive. If my chat GPT outline I created for a blog that I go and write myself is successful, that's business for my company. So like it does all become cyclical in a way, and it can lead to a net good. I think we just got to think about it harder. And I love how he approached it, with show me your prompts. Like that's such a great way to approach this problem. And I think as people, we need to think about, deep fakes and AI generated video and AI generated images. What are the questions we need to be asking about these technologies now before they spiral out of control? And how do we get there? How do we think about it more faster versus it's become a problem that we now have to solve reactively? One thing that blew my mind a few weeks ago was the bank hack that happened in China, where the individual who's in charge of the finances was on the phone with his CEO and his CFO, or on a WebEx. They had their faces, they used all their mannerisms, but it was actually basically people puppeting with deepfake AI, and convinced him to like wire them some number of millions of dollars just because of deepfakes. And it's like that's where it gets scary for me, because that's where it impacts businesses. And I think we don't have the right rules and regulations around this technology yet. But at the same time, there's so much potential behind it. So I don't want to lock it behind a door. I think we just got to think about it more.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I have 7 kids, and they're all they're all adults at this point. But one of my sons recently was like, because I work in tech and I make podcasts and stuff, and he said, your likeness and your voice and your everything is out there so much, it would be easier than most for someone to go make a deep fake of you. And so he told me about a thing he had seen online where I was like, what? Companies should do that too, where he was like, what? We need to have like a trigger word. We need to have a safe word that said, like if someone gets a call that's supposedly from me, that's like, hey, I just crashed the car, I need you to send me $1,000 right now, that they can go, all right, well, what's the safe word?
Yeah.
Because and companies should have that too. There should be like don't process any transactions. I don't care how pissed off the CEO or the CFO sounds on the phone or looks like on the video chat. Like if they don't know the safe word, don't do it.
It's zero trust IRL, right? Like we need to start being skeptical of a lot more than I think we were ready for, but it's not a bad practice. I love that idea. Yeah, it's just a little bit of skepticism when it comes to big decisions and ensuring people are who they say they are. Their intentions are clear and good and sound. Like adds a little bit of frustration to the day, but it can save lives, it can save money, it can save everything.
Well, and I just saw something on LinkedIn like yesterday that where someone said, look, a good no leader who is good will have a problem with you verifying before you do something like that. Like to be like, all right, you know what? I'm going to end this call. I'm going to go call your cell phone and we can continue this conversation. Something else to verify that this is legit. So they're like, no matter how pissed off they seem or how urgent it seems, like any good leader would be okay with you saying, all right, well, we're going to do one extra step here just to verify this is legit.
It's exactly it. It's funny when there was a very large breach about 10 years ago, and my data was in that, and very quickly my life spiraled out of control because hackers got my social security number. They had all my information. They had a field day with my parents' bank account, interestingly enough, not my own, which, was weird to find out. But there's just a little bit of verification can go so long of a way. And when it comes to money, matters of finance, I didn't mind after that fact that I had my credit all locked. I couldn't just go create a credit card. I had to, call the vendors and let them know if I wanted to do that. I couldn't just, swipe anywhere I wanted and do a debit transaction. I had to use my PIN for everything. Like it's a little bit of frustration on the end user, but it buys so much peace of mind and security that it's always worth taking that extra step. And I think we saw it a lot with consumers and individuals who are impacted in mass by these breaches and hacks. But businesses haven't caught up yet because they've only just recently started to become a target of consumer level attacks as the technology has become business grade.
Yeah. Well, and the inconvenience, that you talk about, it's like, pretty much everything at this point is using some form of, you need an authenticator on your phone. At the very least, they're going to send you an SMS code,
Right.
which, there's all kinds of reasons that that's actually a flawed multi-factor authentication, but it's maybe better than nothing. But, so you have like the authenticator apps or passkey now. I mean, and I think initially there were the general consensus was, oh, this is such a headache, why do I have to do extra steps or whatever? It's like, okay, well, that extra 5 seconds is maybe going to keep your credit cards and your bank safe. So, just maybe deal with it.
Yep. And I think that's exactly where businesses need to be too, is, all these extra steps of taking to secure your data, your infrastructure, your information. That is resilience against the next wave of attack that we don't know about yet, unfortunately, and we won't know until it happens.
Yeah. Well, so jumping back then to the other topic, I would say again, it comes back to needing a solution for how do I classify the data? How do I take 50 terabytes of data and then figure out of that 50 terabytes, maybe there's only 5 terabytes that I actually really need to back up. There's so much junk. This is tangential, but my wife and I were just talking about this like a couple weeks ago. I get a lot of email. Like if I go like a day without checking my inbox or whatever, and I come back, I'll have like 200 emails. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, most of them just going delete, 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 delete. But even the ones I save over the course of like a year, like once a year, I'll go through and I'll just spring cleaning, clear out everything. But currently even though I only have 7 unread messages, but I have 10,382 emails in my inbox. Whew. And the thing is, those are just the ones that made it past the delete phase that I thought, yes, there's some reason that I might want to refer back to this. There's something, I need this to look at later, whatever. But what happens when I do the spring cleaning is I end up going in and going, I'll sort them by sender, and I'll just go and like take out whole chunks and go junk, don't need it anymore. And so it's like, so all of that just to say, I've saved these 10,000 plus messages, but I guarantee you that if I was to go through and do spring cleaning now, that I'd save like 100 of them.
Yeah, it's so. I mean, we're human beings. I love the human side. Like we know in the back of our minds, I'm never going to use this stuff, right? Like I'm going to read it once, I'm never going to use it again, but I'm going to hold on to it because I might need it. And I don't know how we got programmed to become data hoarders, but I'm willing to bet there's more of us that hoard data than there aren't. And I think especially for businesses, if you work in a company that does digital business in this day and age, you probably have data hoarding tendencies. And you are contributing to the complexity of your business's backup and recovery, challenges. And it's, we're conditioned to finish our plates when it comes to food. We're conditioned to hold on to every email because we might need it. There might be something in there we come back to. And then a week from now, we're never going to think about that email. We're never going to look at it again.
It's funny. It's the related to that is, every year when the next gen Samsung and iPhones come out, there's been for years now the battle over, who could take a better picture of a full moon. And then Samsung won that battle. Then we found out Samsung was actually cheating, and just kind of like AI generating a moonshot for you. But the silly part of it is, we feel compelled to go, oh, that's a full moon. It's beautiful. I'm going to take a picture of that full moon. And it's like, okay, there's like 25 million pictures of a full moon that you could just go search online that are going to be way better than yours. Like, I don't care how good your phone camera is. Like, that picture already exists and it's better than yours. So why waste your time? Same thing, like if you go to the Eiffel Tower. You go to the Louvre and you see the Mona Lisa. It's like, oh, here I mean, and I've done it. I've got the photo album, so I've got the picture of the Mona Lisa. I have the picture of the Venus de Milo. But it is silly because it's like my picture of the Mona Lisa or my picture of the Venus de Milo is crap compared to pictures that I could just go find. But we feel compelled to do it anyway. People feel compelled to every 4th of July video the fireworks, knowing full well not only does nobody in the world care to see their fireworks, but they also will never go look at their own video of the fireworks because it was just fireworks. It'll happen again next year.
It's mind-boggling when you start to dissect the data creation and collection we go through. Like, we are such weird little creatures when it comes to, I love it. Cause I heard, I need to validate this because I've brought it up multiple times now, and I love the concept, but I don't know how true this is. So it was someone was talking on a radio program I was listening to, and they basically said, if you take a picture of something, the neurons in your brain are less likely to connect and make a memory of it because you have that picture and you're not creating a true memory to recall on. And it's so interesting if that's true or not. I love the idea that even our brains realize that we are betraying ourselves in all this data creation and collection because we're not appreciating things in the moment. We're not taking the time to actively be. Instead, we're trying to create and collect. And I think it's an interesting topic just in general is everyone's an influencer. Everyone's a content creator. Everyone has a TikTok or an Instagram, and they're all contributing to this massive amount of data. And to tie it all back, all they're doing is feeding these robots more and more stuff, which can help or hurt the greater collective as a whole with the output of said data. So it's just, it boggles the mind.
From a business perspective, though, so like around 2000, I was working with the .com, and this is where I had like the tape backups that were automated, et cetera. And data was much more expensive at the time. It was much more expensive to get hard drives. It was more, everything about it was more expensive. And I had gone to the CEO to say, okay, well, look, we're kind of maxed out on this storage. We're kind of maxed out on this. Like, we need to start looking at, how long do we want to keep data, or what data can we get rid of? And his response to me was, here's more budget, buy the storage. We're not getting rid of data. And I was like, okay, but we have a bunch of data. Like we don't need this crap. We have no use for it. And he said, well, we have no use for it now. He said, but I don't know what use I might think of for it 6 months from now. If you get rid of it, it's of no value to us. But 6 months from now, if I think of a different way to use the data, I'm going to want the data. And so he was like, no, we save everything. We save all the data.
Whether he's right or he's wrong, at the end of the day, what that means is we spend more money, we go buy more either tape or physical device, or we send it to the cloud, which does use more resources because cloud is a physical object, even though we like to think of it as just infinite storage.
I'm always like, cloud is just someone else's server.
It's someone else's computer. And eventually, I think about the exabytes of data that we're creating today. Eventually, we're going to hit a stopping point. Like, we're not going to be able to scale at the amount that we create. And then what happens to data protection? How do we know what's good? And how do we save a business when it's attacked if all they have is crap? How long does it take to recover in that scenario? And it's just it's not slowing down.
Well, and here's a different angle on a backup challenge. When you're backing up long term, file formats change. So, like, my father-in-law has data that he created in like WordPerfect or Microsoft Works in 2002. Where it's like, okay, he might still have that backup file, but if he goes to access the backup file, he doesn't have a copy of WordPerfect. So, it's like, now what do you do? And the same thing with like images, so we've digitized all of our photos and all of our videos, and we've put them into, we've taken our audio, put it in MP3, we've got M4As, we've got MOVs, whatever, JPEGs, PNGs, all the file types. And so then you back it all up and you archive it in the cloud, and 40 years from now, your grandkids go to get it and they go, what the hell is a JPG?
Yeah, like, is it useful? Is it even usable? Like, are we just wasting space?
And to that point, at least, while a physical photo album is subject to degrading over time, the image is yellow. It could, if my house floods or burns down, I'm going to lose the physical photos. But at least when my grandparents had a photo album, I can still just take that photo album. The format of my eyeballs didn't change. I can still look at the photos. But the same isn't necessarily true going forward now. And I do have both. I mean, I've used and I endorse Scan My Photos to I sent them all of our photos and say, hey, do this. And within a week or so, they send you back a USB key or CDs or however they're doing it these days, with all of the digitized images. Because I wanted both, really. It's like there are things that I'd like to be able to just pick up the photo album and look at, but I also want to know that if the house did flood or burn down, I don't lose everything that we've ever done.
Yeah, and that is the perfect backup use case, right? Like, that is why we back things up as individuals, as businesses, is when there is that precious data, those photos, the photos of your family, the photos of your pets, your home, the things that you can't just go take 4th of July fireworks and, put them in there. But like the things that matter, identifying that and having those safeguarded locations and thinking about, like, it's not just the format. Is this format usable 40 years from now? Like, can I actually recover this? Can I pass this on? I love that line of thought, because that's where I want businesses to get with their data. It's very similar. It's like, what are you backing up? Are we backing up junk email, or are we backing up client data that actually can be useful if we look at it 10 years from now and make decisions based on growth patterns and create generative AIs based on our own internal data that's useful? Being able to identify that and being able to safeguard that in on-prem and cloud and having it in the right format so that it's usable decades from now, that's the challenge. And that's the thing that I think everyone needs to be thinking about today as admins, because otherwise we're going to find ourselves in a situation where they're going to continue to get attacked and they're not going to be able to recover.
Right. Well, and, again, just bringing it to consumer level, on a consumer level, I take a bunch of pictures with my iPhone. And the thing is, I also take a bunch of stupid pictures. I'll take a picture if I'm just and not like stupid pictures like I even want to keep, but like if I'm at the grocery store and there's 5 different kinds of mayonnaise, and I send a picture to my wife going, hey, which one of these do we want? Now that's in my photos. I do screenshots of stupid memes. Now that's in my photos. And the thing is, I could go through every once in a while and purge, but because I have virtually endless data, it's not worth my time. So I'm not gonna. I'm generally speaking, I'm not going to go through. But once upon a time, when the iPhone had less storage, it was a thing to go through. I'd be like, oh, I'm maxed out. I need to go through and clean out all the crap and just identify what are the photos I actually like, and want to keep. And some of that's iPhone. Some of that's just digital photography in general. Because once upon a time, when I was using actual rolls of film in an SLR camera, if you've only got 24 shots on the roll, you're going to be a little pickier about what you take pictures of. So when you go on a vacation, you think a little bit harder about, do you really want that picture of that waterfall? But when you have an iPhone or a smartphone in general, and you can just take all the pictures and figure it out later.
And it's I just put it together, but like your commentary on the moon and the Mona Lisa and the waterfall, what we should be doing as humans is deduplicating this data. Like, does this exist somewhere else? Do I need this? Am I crowding my already crowded personal existence of memories that have been digitized with something that is deduplicated data? Can I just go look up this photo, and is it better than what I have right now? And maybe that's the best practice for consumers, is ask the question, what is this picture going to do for me? I think, we haven't even talked about this, but the idea of the parasocial and the FOMO that occurs all over social media, which is just driven by, I have to prove that I went here. I have to prove that I did a thing, because no one will just take my word on it, or I want likes, or I want attention.
Pixar, it didn't happen.
Right. Pixar didn't happen. Exactly. That's forcing people to go out and create garbage, of potentially deduplicated data. It's, we're doing ourselves a disservice. And I think that, interestingly enough, we're not appreciating the finer detail of things because we're so focused on the memory and capturing it.
To the point you made earlier, and I also haven't validated it, so we could both be wrong, but I believe there is science to back up the idea that, we're offloading this information, therefore our brain doesn't have to process it. And I just had, it was anecdotal, but I just had a conversation in the last few months about that as it relates to like maps and driving directions. I mean, when I was in high school, I had a job delivering pizza. It was pre-internet, pre-smartphone. So I basically literally had the map of my city memorized. I could just look at the address. I knew where to go. I don't think any pizza delivery person today would know where to go without the GPS telling them where to go. And the reason we were having the conversation is because a friend of mine was talking about his daughter who'd been driving for 2 or 3 years, and he was trying to have a conversation with her about where she went just in the local area, and she couldn't name the roads or the intersections. She's like, I just go where the thing tells me to go. And it's like, okay, but you should know the name of the road next to your house. But I guess, but where I would maybe disagree a little bit is, I think we have to look at, okay, but in a similar way to, when I talk to cybersecurity companies and cybersecurity vendors, and they talk about using generative AI, and they say, well, we can use generative AI to do all of this, the things that can be routine, the things that can be automated, the things that are just processing data just to determine, okay, which of these incidents should I look at? We can do the grunt work with AI so that the human beings can focus on bigger, better, more important things. We're taking away the base level, but now you can go do something else. So maybe there's an argument to be made there as well. Okay, do I really need to remember the map of my city, or can I put that cognitive power to something better, to better use on something else, because I've got a phone to tell me how to get there?
Yeah. And it's, I think that's the way we need to be thinking about it too, because I think there's going to come a time when generative AI is going to be critical for backup. We're going to need AI to parse through what of this giant exabyte of data do we need to put into primary backup storage versus just long-term archive versus, garbage tier. We're going to have these tools to help us. So how do we train them to identify what's useful? Semi-related anecdote of just how things have gotten so weird. I met someone in real life for the first time, but I'd seen them digitally numerous times, and they'd only ever used face filters. And I didn't even realize it's the same person. We are getting to a point where the real world is almost less real than the digital world. Our digital presence is more real than our physical presence is, because we don't have as many physical engagements, and I think we live so much of our lives online. Then the question becomes, is the digital more important to protect? And when it comes to business data, consumer data, what is more valuable now? And that's a place I'm not ready to go yet.
Right. Well, and how do we leverage the benefits and the utility of these things without creating a future that looks like Ready Player One or Wall-E?
Yeah. I've been reading Snow Crash recently, and that book has just blown my mind, because it's all of the horrible things that I worry about. But it was written in 1997. And man, this author just knew. He knew where we were going long before we got there.
Well, we're running out of time here, but I I would say that, if you go back and you look at sci-fi, it's like you do have to often wonder, like, okay, well, wait a minute. Were you, prescient? Like, did you predict this, or did it become self-fulfilling? Like, because you imagined it, someone else went, why don't we build that? I mean, look at all the stuff that was created, in Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek universe that we just have now. It just exists. And that kind of stuff is crazy. And I think, again, it's like when you look back and you say, okay, well, whatever, Ray Bradbury wrote this in 19 whatever. Like, how did he know? It's like, well, wait, did he know? Or was he just creative enough to come up with like this fantasy world that someone else that sparked the imagination of someone else who had the technology to try to make it a reality?
Yep. And it's interesting. Like, we used to have Star Trek. Well, we still have Star Trek, but like we used to have programs like that. And even further back, we had the World's Fair, where all the great technologists and inventors would come together and they'd share ideas. And it was all kind of in the name of, entertainment and knowledge share. And now it's become so business oriented. You look at, major events and conferences that are focused on technology share, and it's a lot of patented IP. And I think we've kind of fallen away from the idea of growing technologically positively as a society, and instead it's growing technology competitively as businesses. And it's something to be said there for sure.
Yeah. So all right. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to join the podcast. It was a fun conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony. It's great being here.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, you too.
I appreciate you investing your time to listen to the podcast, but I also invite you to engage on social media. Please go like our Facebook page and follow at TechSpective on Twitter and Instagram. You can feel free to let me know what you like, let me know what you don't like, let me know if you love it, let me know if it sucks, and let me know what products you'd like to see reviewed or what questions you'd like to see answered in future posts.